Hello, everybody, and welcome to The How, the podcast about humans of Wharton. We're very happy to have drumbeat Eric Kacou with us today. Eric, welcome.
Thank you so much, Elena. It's very nice to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
So, I hear you're in Accra. What's going on? What are you doing there?
I am in Accra today for a continental event called Youth Connect Africa, which is a platform bringing together governments, business, and development partners to create jobs for youth in Africa.
What is it you do, Eric?
Listen, I decided about 10 years ago to actually start a business called Entrepreneurial Solutions Partners, whose objective it is to help the private sector and entrepreneurs in Africa grow their businesses and in the process transform our economies. So specifically, we provide two types of services. On the one side, we have what we call scale to help businesses scale. It's very much like incubation acceleration. For those services, we work with 530 SMEs across 10 countries in the continent. And the second practice is a practice called Insight, which is basically consulting, but focused on working with institutions and on issues which can help the private sector grow.
Nice. And how did you get into consulting industry in the first place?
Listen, I got into consulting straight out of undergrad. So I would say I fell into the soup. I was invited to attend some consulting information sessions. At the time, I wanted to do a PhD, so I didn't have in my mind to go and work. But the consulting pitch was very, very effective. I mean, what I got from it was that they would actually pay me to learn. So I figured it was a much better deal than having to pay to learn. So that's how I got into consulting. And then I started at first working in strategy with corporations. And then I then looked for opportunities to work in Africa, where I come from. And I have been working in this space across the continent since 2001. So when I came to Wharton, I was already working in consulting in Africa. And then I decided to start my own consulting and investment platform, Entrepreneurial Solutions Partners, back in 2011, so 10 years ago.
And you worked with some fancy consultants, like world-renowned consultants.
Yes, I did. I worked with the Monitor Group, which has now been acquired by Deloitte, I believe. And what made it fancy at the time was that Professor Michael Porter of Harvard Business School was one of the main shareholders of that company. And they also had the distinct capability of working with developing countries, which is the reason why I joined them in the first place, because I always knew that I wanted to work in Africa.
And Eric, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that origin story. So you tell us that you come from Africa. What was it like growing up? And then what eventually led you to come to the U.S. and study at Wharton?
Origin story. So it depends, and because I'm getting old these days, so it depends on how far back you want to go with the origin stories. So let me give you the one which will take less than 2 hours. So I would say fundamentally, I basically grew up in Cote d'Ivoire. I think one of the things that really helped me get a sense for what my country was about is that between the ages of 6, 7 to 15, 16, every summer I would go back to the village. So, and my village is one of those places where people grow cocoa. For those of you who don't know, Cote d'Ivoire is actually the first cocoa producer in the world. I mean, we produce about 40% of the world's cocoa production. But then what happened over that sort of 8 to 10 years, I went back to the village every summer. I could see the standard of living of the population coming down. So it was fundamentally disturbing to me that, chocolate was still very, very popular. And somehow, the people who produce chocolate in the village or the cocoa beans couldn't make a living out of it. So I think this is where my sort of drive to kind of work on the continent and on economic development issues came from. And then Cote d'Ivoire is actually a French-speaking country. So when it came time to go to undergrad, I didn't speak English. I knew that if you wanted to study business, you had to go to North America. So I ended up in Montreal. And then when I finished in Montreal, as I told you, I was invited for info sessions. I ended up at Monitor. Then one thing led to the other. But then when I had the opportunity to go back to Africa and work, at the time it was in Rwanda. It was in September 2001. I basically jumped on that opportunity. And I came to Wharton after having spent a year in Rwanda. And then after Wharton, I went back to Rwanda to continue the work that I was doing there. And then, basically 9 years later, I started my own business.
Thank you so much for providing that background. And I'm curious,
Thank
when
you.
you noticed that in the village that was producing the cocoa, that essentially every year the standard of living was going down. What did you see as the reason for causing that? And have you been able to work in such a way that you've been able to combat that over the last few years? What do you see as the fundamental cause for the standard of living going down?
Listen, I think the fundamental cause is basically globally integrated supply chains. And I think COVID made that issue a global one, because the second we had to shut down ports and we couldn't move, all of us realized the world over that most of what we consume is no longer produced in a single country, and a good percentage of it comes from China. In the context of cocoa, it's slightly different, because although the beans are produced mostly in Cote d'Ivoire, my country, and in Ghana, where I am today, both countries only produce the raw material, which means cocoa is treated on the market like a commodity, which means the cocoa producer, if they are lucky, they will get 2% of the value per kilogram of your chocolate bar. So obviously it's very difficult to make a living, because the 2% of the value is actually the part that goes to the country, and then the farmer gets even a smaller percentage of that. Then you have the cost of labor, you have the cost of inputs, you have all those other costs. So it becomes very, very difficult. And as you know, I mean, the way business works in general, the stakeholders or the people to actually make money are the ones that are the closest to the customer, right? So, and the cocoa and coffee farmers are the furthest possible from the customer. Now, to your point around whether or not I have been able to do something about this particular issue, I would say somewhat yes, but not as much as I would like to. Yes, because in some of the work that I've done with different countries, including Rwanda, I've been able to actually work on commodity value chains and help some of the countries change their strategies. So instead of just selling the raw commodity to an indiscriminate buyer, we've basically worked with SMEs and co-ops to help them use the fair trade channels to sell the products, which has helped a great deal. But I would say, so this has been good. And today, in the 530 entrepreneurs that we are working with, a number of them are adding value to our business, our natural commodities, either for the local market, because there is a growing middle class in Africa, but also for exports. So I would say, to a certain extent, this has been my kind of small contribution. But the challenge is still very, 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 very big, because we're talking about a continent where you have 1.1 billion people. Anywhere, I think 65% of them are actually youth. Most of them live in rural area on subsistence agriculture, which is really something to reckon with.
What needs to be done, Eric? Can you solve it in your lifetime?
I want to think that, I'm not sure I would use, when you say you, I think we should say, can we solve it? Because my view is that this is one of those issues like climate, where no single stakeholder or no single person or no single nation can solve it. I think it requires a fundamental change, and I think a reset on how we approach things, and a reset of mindsets, a reset of economic models, a reset of consumption patterns. And I think it is more of a we problem than a me problem. So for sure, I think if we all go to it, we can, because if you look at what has happened in fair trade or what has happened in the organic movement, there is clearly a growing list of customers who are keen to basically vote for certain ways of doing business with their money. But that has to become the norm. It can be the exception. And I think all of us have a role to play. I don't know that this is going to be solved through summits. I mean, I am very, I'm very, very pessimistic around the ability of summit to solve those issues, for the simple reason that in a number of our governance systems, you are looking at leaders who are in power for very short amount of times, who have every incentive not to drive the biggest sacrifice, because I think, nobody wants to make a sacrifice today for something that may happen tomorrow, right? So I think what is needed is more like movements. I think movements where citizens and the people, and I believe that social media could be used to foster that kind of a conversation, that kind of a change. But to me, I don't believe that it is only going to happen because people go to like a summit. I mean, in the very same way that I don't want to be pessimistic, but I am very skeptical about what will happen in Glasgow next week. I know there is a big climate summit there, and everybody's flying there. And yeah, I mean, I think there was a leak today on BBC, which kind of share that apparently some of the world richest nations had been doing like a lot of like lobbying work to suggest that the impact of climate wasn't as bad as it really is. So they wanted the report to be rewritten to minimize what's going on. I mean, we're talking about this very survival of mankind here. We're talking about us coming to a point where cities like New York and Miami, etc., are completely flooded. Yet you have lobbies out there who are trying to fight to keep the status quo. So I think those issues are very, very deep. And I think this is really a place where Wharton as a community also has a role to play. I think many of our classmates sit in places where they allocate a vast amount of resources. And because they allocate those resources, they have a very concrete way to change behavior, right? So, and I have seen it with some of the players in impact investing. I've been in touch with a few of our classmates or alums who are working in the space. I think there is a lot that a community like Wharton can do, but it is not something that can be done by one individual. It has to be done through communities and through groups of people.
When you think about in your role trying to affect the most change possible, and obviously we each have 24 hours in a day, what do you see as like the most effective lever to pull to have the greatest amount of change? Where are you kind of focusing your efforts on now?
I think that as they say, to whoever sort of has a hammer, everything is a nail. So I was basically trained sort of in business. I've done some investing, so those are the tools that I use the most. But it's very clear to me that the power of what we do is more in the demonstration effect. So because why? Because whatever people can see and they can believe, they have an opportunity to replicate and sort of make happen, right? So to me, I mean, we work with 530 businesses. Although it is a big number, considering that 10 years ago it was only one business that we were working with. 530 businesses in Africa is still very, very small, right? So even if our big hairy goal is to reach 1 million businesses, which I hope we will reach very soon through technology and digitalization. But still, even if we reach 1 million, if you have 1.1 billion people, that's still very, very small. So I think the most important lever has to be that demonstration effect, whereby we take some cases that work, and then we amplify those, and we take some cases that fail, and then we research why we failed, and we also amplify the lesson. So I think as long as we can work on mindsets and we can work on understanding and we can really make sure that people realize that there are other ways of doing things, then I think we'll be fine.
Eric, you were in Canada for undergrad and then in the US for grad school. You could have stayed and you could have had a nice life, at least for yourself and your family. Why did you choose to go back?
Wow, that's a good question. Okay, I think first I have to give you a little disclaimer. I have a pretty nice life. So I really believe that for a number of us, I think at Wharton, and I had a chance to go to the Kennedy School at Harvard afterwards. I think people from Ivy Leagues feel like, a nice life is living in New York and London, etc. You have no idea. I mean, because I still get to go to all those places when I want to. But life actually in a country like Cote d'Ivoire with my two little daughters and my wife, I mean, I cannot complain. I mean, we have a very good quality of life. So I wanted to put this disclaimer out there, right? Now, going back to your question around why I made the decision to work in Africa, I think this is really the place where I felt I could have the most marginal impact. So it's bizarre to say, but for me, it's really about where can I spend where does my unique contribution make the most impact? And I believe that this is in Africa because some of the skills and networks and experience that I bring are uniquely disruptive in that particular environment. I think if I were elsewhere, to your point, yes, I would still make a good living. When I was based in Paris with Monitor, our offices were at Place Vendôme. I had apartments at Place de la Madeleine. I mean, almost like Central Park in New York. I mean, great comfort. But then in terms of marginal impact, I don't feel like I was doing that much. Whereas being on the continent, clearly, what I have to offer can, and to be fair, and this is why I wanted to make the point, from where I am sitting, I don't feel like there is a trade-off that I'm making, as in getting like a bad life, just to come and help my continent. I mean, if I said that, that wouldn't be the truth, because I feel like I'm getting the best of all worlds, if you will. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very happy with my choice and my trade-off.
And Eric, what
Yes.
or who influenced you to become the person you are? The person who is looking to maximize impact, the person who cares.
That is a difficult question. That's a difficult question because, unfortunately, I'm not sure it's just one person. So I would say big influences in my life. My mother, for sure. I mean, for the values that she instilled in me. My parents divorced when I was a kid. So, a lot of who I have become is from the values that she really instilled in me, for sure. Then I had some very good teachers and professors, all the way from primary school, all the way to grad school. And some of them I'm still in touch with. People who were very instrumental, I think, in my life. Then I have some of the leaders that I've worked with. Somebody like Paul Kagame is somebody that I find inspirational beyond what anybody can comprehend. Because you look at a country like Rwanda that had a genocide, you think about what he's managed to do with the country, for Africa over a period of 20 years in our lifetime. It's just amazing, because I don't know that anybody with all the problems that he inherited would have been able to do the same. Some of the entrepreneurs that we work with, like there is a young woman called Mabre Cissé. She's probably 22, 23. She decided that she was going to put women in the northern part of Cote d'Ivoire near the Sahel region in cooperatives, and then she was going to buy honey from them and turn that honey into very nice sticks, which she now sells in most of the supermarkets in the country. And now she wants to figure out a way to sell her products in Europe. This is inspiring beyond whatever you. So to me, I mean, honestly, it's more a community of people that I find inspiring. Yeah. So I'm not sure that I can just limit it to just one person.
And what about the moments when you see the opposite? You know, the signs, the summits that don't change anything, the moments when you see that nothing is changing, no matter how hard you work, you still like feels like you're blown at the ocean.
Yeah. Listen. Okay. So I am basically wired sort of a little bit differently. As Elena, who is a classmate of mine, might know. I mean, some of my friends would probably know this. I think I have a very specific outlook in life, and I think I can have a very sober assessment of what's going on. But then it doesn't necessarily discourage me. I think instead it gives me an urge to even persist and try to do more. So yeah. So when I go to those summits where I don't think like they're changing much, I'm like, okay, all right, what can we do that's different that may change something? Or, if I'm working on a situation where I don't think it's working, like for example, how was my business born? My business was born because I felt like, if all we did was to work just with governments, we wouldn't go very far. So I said, look, let me try and see how I can work with entrepreneurs, right? So for me, those yeah, we have to deal with the reality of what's actually going on. And we cannot think of whatever we are trying to do based on some fantasy on how the world is. We have to kind of figure out the way it really is and deal with whatever is there. So that begins by having a diagnostic and an assessment, which can be very sober, but that shouldn't be a cause for like a discouragement or giving up. I mean, in I think instead it should be a drive to make things different. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but that's the way I look at it. Because look, if I was going to go and say, look, I'm stressed and blah blah blah, blah, things won't change because I'm stressed, right? So I have to do something about it. So yeah, after I go through the frustration and whatever, I then say, okay, what can I do about it? Then I try to do something about it.
So you don't get depressed.
That's not true, but I basically I put a timer on it. Yeah. So I get very disappointed for like a day, and then I'm like, okay, all right, dude, move on. What can you do about it? Yeah. Because otherwise you get into your own, then you start thinking, oh, pity me, da 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 da. And honestly, at least from where I'm sitting, I don't feel like I have to be pitied. Like you were telling me, oh, what sacrifice did you make to be in Africa? I'm not sure I made a sacrifice. So I won't pretend there is a sacrifice I made if I don't feel like there is one, So yeah.
Wow, that's such a great
Yeah,
outlook.
basically, listen, deadlines work with everything.
So do you like go as far as setting a timer on your
Deadlines work with
phone?
dreams. No, I mean deadlines work for like a dream, because if you have a dream and you put a deadline on it, then it becomes a plan, right? If you are depressed and you put a deadline on it, and then it compels you to action. I mean, so I think at some point we have to deal with the reality of what's there as opposed to what is in our head. At least that's my feeling.
So, question for you, Eric. I love this thing about
Yes.
deadlines. So, let's say that something happens and you're feeling depressed and you're saying, okay, I have a deadline to feel better about this tomorrow. And then you wake up tomorrow and you don't feel better. What happens? How do you sort of reconcile this?
Okay, so I think for me the key. Okay, so um another thing. So I love ideas, and I love to think, right? So which is the reason why, for example, I have written a couple of books. I have more books I want to write. I've come up with frameworks. I mean, I love that kind of stuff. So for somebody like me, it can be very dangerous to be in my head because I can be there for a very long time. Does that make sense? So what comes from that is probably a different way to approach things, which is to try and worry about other people or what's happening out there. Because the second I change the focus from me to something that's happening out there, that gives me energy to move.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense, and that's brilliant.
that's really what works for me. Because look, I basically run a business and I have like a number of people, and I have, I don't know, 70 people now. You basically have like, clients that are supposed to do some things that they don't. You wake up and, I mean, literally every morning I wake up, there's some sort of a problem that I have to deal with, right? So if I focus only on my issues, I get depressed. If I think, okay, um, there is this entrepreneur who says they need something, what can I do about it? Very quickly, I realized that the problems that I'm facing are actually very okay.
Yep.
I mean,
Perspective.
seriously. If I go, I mean, I am in Accra today. I can go to not very far from my hotel. I'm staying in a very nice hotel. I'm sure within a radius of half an hour, I can go to a place where people haven't had any food for the past 2 or 3 days. So if I focus on those issues, I mean, it becomes very difficult for me to feel so much pity on myself. And in sort of saying this, maybe it is a coping mechanism, right? So I am not saying that people are not right in feeling sort of depressed. I'm just saying this is the way I deal with it. So if it's helpful for other people, I hope it helps. But I find that if I can focus on the reality, as in what is really, really going on, if I can shift the focus from me to somebody else, if I can put a deadline on it, right? Some of those techniques, I've used them over time and they have helped. And then if I feel like I'm getting depressed for a very long time and all those things are not working, then it means I need to make a significant change in my life. Either I have a key relationship that's not working, or maybe the job I am in is no longer what I should be doing, or maybe, I mean, then it is a signal that there is something kind of deeper that's going on, which requires a version 2.0.
Eric, Eric, tell us about your books. How did you get into writing? What prompted the first book?
So the first book came out of about 10 years working in Africa and trying to make sense of everything that I was frustrated about. And yes, and then kind of saying, okay, so if I was going to do something about it, where should I start? And this, what I found was really important, were a few things. First, mindset. Second, focusing on entrepreneurs. And there I am a little bit biased because I am a business major and this is the only thing that I know. So guess what? I'll tell you that you should focus on entrepreneurs. And then three, it was really an issue of what do we do for those entrepreneurs? Let's give them the right combination between capital and insights and technical assistance to basically do well, right? So, which led to my business. The second one was a conversation with actually a Wharton grad who is in the aviation business, and then we were chatting, and he's been trying to run airports across the continent. I think he's running like 6 or 7 of them, and then we were complaining, like talking about the role that travel made in our lives and how it was very difficult to travel across the continent. And I mean, and then it became a thing where every time we would meet, we would complain about it. We say, you know what, let's write a book about it and propose what should be done about it. That's how the second one was born. Yeah. So maybe that's also a way to deal with depression, actually, now that you ask the question.
And how did you manage? You were working full time. You had family. How did you manage to squeeze in writing?
Look, I think as with everything, if you look at it very, very carefully, I mean, first of all, you have to really decide whether or not you want to do it. Because I think there are a number of things that we say we want to do, which are basically nice to have. So if it's a nice to have, don't beat yourself too much about it. You probably won't do it because you have other things which are more important and more pressing, which you are actually doing right now. So the first thing you have to do is to kind of decide whether or not this is something that you want to do. Number one. Now, if you decide that this is something that you want to do, then you have to figure out basically how do you work as it relates to whatever you're trying to do. So for me, for example, I can pretty much express. So in a conversation like this one, I see things and then I can express them pretty easily. Therefore, for me to write a book, I don't sit down and try to write. What I do is I try to engage in a conversation with somebody who understands the topic I'm trying to write about, and then we record whatever I'm saying, right? After it's been recorded, because of the work that I do, because I was trained, I went to business school, I can read basically a few hundred pages uh, in a few hours, right? So then I can edit. What I do every day, I receive documents, business plan, investment memos, etc. I read them, I get the synthesis, I figure out what's really important. Then I say, okay, let's do this, 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 this. So if I do this process a couple of times and I know what I want to write about, I can have a like a manuscript very quickly. Now,
Wow,
this
that's
technique
genius.
will not necessarily, I mean, listen, again, I haven't written bestsellers, right? So if you're trying to write a bestseller, don't follow my advice. My books have done very, very, very well for what I wanted them to do, but they are not New York Times bestseller, and I don't make a living out of writing books, right? I am more of an entrepreneur and an investor, right? So, this is kind of a side gig, but it's a fantastic side gig. I mean, yeah.
So, Eric, who do you see as the audience of your books, and how have you engaged with your audience community, like with the medium of your books?
Wow, that's a very good question. I think, okay, so there is who I see, and then there is who has actually reacted to them. And the two things are very different. I thought it would be, for entrepreneurs and leaders and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? When the first one came out, I was invited by the Global Business School Network to a conference in Mexico to talk about the book. I was invited by a foundation to visit like 4 countries in Southern Africa to talk about the book. I was invited. I had a chance to present it at Davos in Switzerland. So honestly, I thought it would be helpful for African entrepreneurs and some of the leaders who are looking to work with them. But it turns out that some people have looked at the thing and I thought it was interesting, and then I was basically invited in all those places. So yeah, that's what I can say. How was I as a kid? That's a very good question. Look, I would say that there were some challenges there. I would say 2 or 3 main challenges. I think, first of all, there was the divorce of my parent. So that wasn't easy because my 2 parents splitting for like a young kid is definitely not something easy to comprehend, because I was 4 at the time, and they were not getting along, and so that's complicated. That's one thing. Second, when I turned about like at 9, I went to secondary school right after primary school, and I went to a boarding house where I spent 7 years, which was fantastic for me because it was really it was a place where kids were selected based on merit. So they were selected from the entire country. No social class was a factor. It was just, and then it was, that boarding house was really significant for me. It was fantastic. It was great. It sort of helped me with associations and being outgoing, and basically because from age 0 to age about 10, I was an only child. So I think if I hadn't gone to that boarding school, I may have been a very different person than who I am today. So the boarding school helped. Then when I was about 17, 18, I was diagnosed with a condition where people felt I may not make it. So they were like, oh, but there is a likelihood that you have like at some point they thought I had like 3 or 6 months to live, right? So that also gave me a different outlook on a number of things, because I was like, okay, sure. So I had all this plan and things I was going to do tomorrow, maybe, etc. And then you hear, look, there is a probability that you may not be here in 3 months. You're like, okay, maybe I should think about all these things differently. So that also helped.
And how is that village now, the village that you visited during the summer?
It is actually interesting you would ask that. I was there about 3 weeks ago, and I was actually impressed, because I feel like there is a lot more dynamism. I feel like people are less, they are less in a waiting mode, and they are doing something. So I was able to see a number of young people with business.
Can you complete the sentence? To me, Wharton is a place blank.
To me, Wharton is a family. I have been to many sort of schools and I think institutions, and for some reason, Wharton is the one where I have the most friends, and Wharton is the one where I have remained involved. And, Wharton is also the place as well where I have had some of the issues that you have in a family, right? In a family, nothing is perfect. So, you have things you complain about, you have people you fight with, you have people that you basically like. And so I think Wharton for me is a family.
Thank you, everybody,
Sounds
for
good.
watching, and see you on the next
Thank you.
episode. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
joining
Take
us,
care.
Eric. Bye-bye.
Thank you.